Good morning, everyone. Welcome to C3S Institutional Dialogue with Dr. Arvind Yelery on the topic of economic assessment of efficiency of economic measures against China to accelerate the process of decoupling. So, to introduce a topic to you, India has been considering a range of economic measures aimed at Chinese firms amid the border tensions in the northern borders. What is happening? The move to ban to start with the 59 Chinese apps may just be the start, with other measures likely to follow if the tensions along the line of actual control continue without disengagement. India is also considering a range of economic measures aimed at Chinese firms amid the border tension between the two countries. Reports have also started to emerge that the government is considering trade and procurement curbs targeting China. Also, the government is also increasing the scrutiny of Chinese investment in many sectors and taking a considered decision to keep out the Chinese firms from 5G trials in which they are now involved. These moves could potentially cost Chinese companies billions of dollars in contracts and future earnings. The message from India is straight. It cannot continue trade and investment relations as normal if China does not agree to return to the status quo of April before its incursion along the LAC began. The Chinese government and state media have hit out at these measures. In separate statements, the Chinese Foreign Ministry in Beijing and Chinese Embassy in New Delhi have called the measures by India and asked India to revive these moves. The China itself is no stranger to such moves and having frequently deployed economic countermeasures from restricting market access to boycotting goods in the midst of its own disputes with countries ranging from South Korea and Japan to the Philippines and also including Mongolia. These economic sanctions have been one of the key tools of Chinese coercion. The report said China has punished countries that undermines its territorial claims and foreign policy goals with measures such as restricting trade, encouraging popular boycott, and cutting off tourism. Among all these, in the Indo-China economic relationship where trade is lopsided in China's favor, both sides have different levers that they could turn to, but the options are tilted in China's favor because China is far less dependent on India's market than India is on Chinese imports. With this, I would like to hand over to Commodore Vasan sir for opening remarks. Over to you, sir.
Very good morning to everybody. Dr. Arvind Yelery, General Narasimhan, Arvind Muralidharan, Colonel Hariharan, Mr. Subramaniam, and many others who have joined us today, this morning, for this interaction, which is of great relevance to all of us. Particularly, the people who are looking at the economic dimensions of this standoff. Thanks to Bala for providing the backdrop, which by and large describes the situation that we are in. A lot of this is not necessarily that is made by India. As we are discussing with General Narasimhan, a lot of this is perhaps very untimely action and immature action initiated by China, perhaps with wrong calculations. They have perhaps even not remembered the old dictum which says bide for time. They thought they are bidding for time. They have not obviously done their homework. At least Xi definitely appears not to have done the homework when he engaged in this misadventure, hoping that while nations are fighting COVID, he'll be able to launch this offensive in multiple dimensions. As has been brought out, India has not been sitting quiet. In fact, many of the other countries around the world have also joined hands. Whether it is the 10-nation initiative led by UK to say that we will get together to have alternatives for the 5G, because as you are aware, whether it's in UK or Europe or even US for that matter, 5G had a large presence and they are looking at increasing these footprints. And with these new initiatives of the 10 democratic countries led by UK and with the technological superiority of EU, things are going to be even more difficult. The CEO of Huawei is on record saying that they already lost phenomenal amount of money in cancellation of contracts and in terms of the avenues which are going to open up away from China. Also, as has been brought out also by Bala, these apps, when it was initially banned, this 58, so there are a lot of eyebrows which went up, said, what is this digital strike all about? How will banning of 58 apps, prevent any kind of economic onslaught by China, particularly when we have such a huge trade deficit? And today you have seen that another 118 have been also banned. So, there is a message that's being sent to say that India cannot be taken for granted. Also, as we were discussing before the meeting started, along with General Narasimhan, Muralidharan, and others, the India has also hardened its stand, and the climate is ripe for us to negotiate and have new alliances. Quad was something, which was not an economic alliance, but more of a strategic military alliance. And India was very, hesitant to embark on the journey of Quad. But however, I think it's China. You can only thank China for consolidating our position on the Quad and for accelerating the process. So I'm sure, the Chinese leadership would be reviewing their decision to get across the border. There are many other areas of economic dependence. Luckily for us, the BRI is one area where we did not fall into the trap, because if you had fallen into this trap and you had, let's say, about another 30, 40 billions coming in every year towards investment, it would have been extremely difficult to decouple. So the process of decoupling, which is not easy, nobody for a moment is saying that it's going to be easy, because there have been serious structural engagements and political engagements with China. And in decades, we have bent backwards to accommodate Chinese expansion. And it's only now perhaps that we've gathered some courage to say that the time is opportune for us to look at other ways to see how we can embark on a new trajectory, which will allow you to decouple from China. Nobody is saying that decouple totally from China, but whatever engagement that will take place hereafter, whether it's economic or political or strategic, will be on terms that are mutually beneficial and not one-sided, which is what it has been all these years. Because with the fond hope that China will support India in many of its aspirational journey, it has not happened. No, there's been a trust deficit, and in every occasion, we have been let down. Whether it is UNGA, whether it is Security Council, whether it is Nuclear Supplier Group. So, and if you go back to the record, we have made it a point to accommodate China's sensitivities. Whether it is Taiwan, Tibet, Hong Kong, we not said a word. Whether it is even developing our own assets in Andaman Nicobar. All this also has an economic angle. So, this is only to provide some kind of, backdrop along with what Bala Subramaniam has already given, to open this discussion with a very accomplished academic, Dr. Arvind, who's been part of C3S for many years now. He did participate with us, and we are in constant touch with him. So we cannot find a better person than him to look at the situation that exists today in terms of the economic counters that India has launched, whether it is the digital strike, whether it is taking charge of the investments in India, whether it is cancellation of various economic orders, or whether it is even the future economic engagements that are under question. So what we are more interested today, which I am sure Dr. Arvind will explore, is the efficacy of these measures. Whatever measures that we have initiated, how efficient have they been? Does it hold a future, or is it just a splash in the pan? So if this has to become something more sustainable and also aid India's economic growth without linking ourselves to China for all the years to come, and looking at alternatives, how will the future pan out in terms of the assessment of the efficacy of these measures that we have initiated? With that, let me hand over to Dr. Arvind. And the standard rules are that all those who are not speaking may kindly mute themselves, number one. Number two, all the questions that are addressed to Dr. Arvind may kindly be put in the chat box, and Dr. Bala will thereafter take over and handle these questions towards the end of the session. So with this, I have great pleasure in inviting Dr. Arvind to take the floor and lead us through these discussions. Over to you, Dr. Arvind.
Thank you, Commander Vasan, and thank you, C3S community, as well as eminent people in the audience, General Banerjee, General Narasimhan, Subramaniam sir, Murli sir, or Hariharan sir, dear colleague and my old friends. Thank you for joining the webinar of much importance to all of us. I think when Vasan sir was explaining, saying that accomplished, I don't think I'm an accomplished one. I'm still a student of a subject which is unpredictable and it is difficult to size or bottle in, it becomes difficult for every researcher to know what China is actually. So I'm trying to learn my bit. Though I work in Peking University, these are my personal opinion, and I would not spare any areas or any criticism whichever are necessary to make this presentation possible. Unfortunately, I don't have a PPT, but I will speak and I will take all of your questions. I'll make sure that you get maximum time to ask the questions and we can interact more through that. Now, as Vasan sir was explaining about, thankfully we are not part of BRI, and we are being spared for some of the problems which BRI is causing in the neighborhood and globally. Uh, there are few things we need to be sure that though we are not subscribing to BRI, but we have been severely affected by BRI schemes. And BRI is now talking about Health Silk, they're talking about technological Silk Road, they're talking about satellite launches and Silk Road. So Chinese are trying to influence every aspect or every gradient of strategic real to influence and to make conducive for the Chinese growth. Recently, you might have heard about the reforms in World Bank and IMF. And especially in IMF, you might have heard about the 14 congressmen wrote letter to the Defense Secretary and Secretary of State, United States, asking that some of the countries which are debt-ridden are applying for funds from international monetary funds. So, what happens is that it's a whole circle and interdependency coupling, which keep all of us connected, worried, and in a loop of volatilities, which are larger than regional, bilateral volatilities. So taking that as a background, I would like to put my presentation in about next 20 to 30 minutes, and we'll try to touch upon emerging areas of concerns for India and as well as for the global communities. Now, let me take you back to about year 2000, 2001, since India started trading with China, and it was very minuscule in terms of its size and scope. But as the trade, bilateral trade grew, the concerns started emerging, and about the Chinese tax rebates, subsidies, or the state intervention to the private as well as the state companies have been so visible that it started predatory measures. It started occupying. It started flooding out the products into global markets. It was not only until June 2020 we realized that there are maps which are causing disturbances, security concerns. Before that also there were concerns raised with regard to the Chinese predatory measures. It's not only about the services, softwares, components, but also in terms of industrial products as well. But I think we have been very naive, and we have been giving up enough space for the traders or for the mercantile community from the Indian sides to develop their own capacity to meet or fight the Chinese aggression. I mean, the commercial and economic aggression, but we could not. And we're still lagging. Why I say we could not? Because the very fact that the trade deficit which we have built over the period of time. Now, that brings up a question to coupling and decoupling. Entire decoupling is not certainly possible, and I think when we talk about coupling, it has number of facets and gradients, right? It has institutional coupling, it has a trade investment coupling, it also has about industrial coupling, it also has financial coupling, currency coupling. So when we talk about coupling, it's a very broad term. But to start with, the recent ban of recent ban on Chinese apps, starting with the 59 apps. In one of my discussion, I called it, Alibaba and Athavan Chor, Alibaba and 58 Chors. So it seems that they all fall into the same category. And recently, 2 days back, we have broaden this scale and included more apps, right? So some of these banned apps include Paitu, Alipay, and some versions of messaging apps of WeChat. Now, WeChat, for me, WeChat was banned, but I was using WeChat work because that's where the universities like Peking University, Tsinghua used to have meet. Also been taken off, and so apps which were only messaging in terms of communicating were initially banned, but now I think more set of bans have been coming in place. That brings me to a question that banning app is certainly a measure which would ensure the safety, security, and sovereignty of Indian cyberspace, as has been put up by the Minister of Electronics and Information Technology. But I would say that it is a too early step, or maybe a too basic step, to block this techno nationalism which is on rise in China for last 20 years or on, because there are many other apps also, platforms which have been used by the Chinese enterprises to enter into the Indian space. Now, what would happen to most of these virtual VPNs, virtual networks, which are being used by the Indians, or has been invested and operated by the Chinese? There are so many of them. I was making a check yesterday. There are more than 200,000 VPNs. I think if you go by just the genre and the people who are creating it, approximately there are about two to about 20 to 25% are of the origin coming from the Chinese. Apart from that, we all have been using these educational apps, right? There was a question about Zoom, but Zoom is only one part, but there are large spectrum of produced which have been marketed by the Chinese. Now, I think that would come in the next in the sequencing. More interesting thing, and I think the worrying fact for all of us, is since the China has been developing its global positioning, satellite system, or technologies or scientific capabilities, we have certain apps which talks about global positionings. Okay, so I think that is going to be one of the major worry for the ministries, for the governments, or for everyone who are concerned about this backdoor theft being done by the Chinese. Apart from that, you will be surprised that the Chinese apps only not only into the communication, they are not only into the domain of uh, Internet of Things. There are many other things, assorted utility apps, which the Chinese are trying to develop or have developed efficiently. You'll be surprised if you go to the market of Surat. If you go to diamond markets in Bombay as well, you would see that the Indian merchants are using the diamond certification check apps produced by the Chinese, but it's used by the Indians. Apart from that, there are major other maps like field area measures or scan maps, which have been used by the Chinese. Not trying to scare you up. I think the bans which we have carried out so far is just a very small percentage of the total canvas of things where the Chinese have been, leveraging. Then Chinese have been building their own capacities. Now we're talking about the Chinese technological capabilities, Chinese technological predatory measures. This is not a new scheme of things, because it is somebody who has been observing China. All of you would know that how Chinese have built up this alternate online reality. None of us would have been able to conceive this imagination in 2007 and 8, that there would be a situation where this online reality created by Chinese would throw out Google and Facebook, right? They barely exist in China, and that's not only the matter. But you look at the tech corporations like Alibaba and Tencent, these two giants, and the duopoly they have playing is quite surprising to understand in last 12 to 13 years. To put into a context, today we welcome the investments by Alipay and corporations, Alibaba, Tencent, saying that they're just the investors. But don't forget a fact over here, that these private companies in China has been playing a critical role in ambushing the foreign tech companies in China for last 20 decades. They have been standing at the back of the government, provincial administration, not to allow the foreign tech firms, or if the tech firms are allowed, they should be given or sharing the technology. If you can remember how Qualcomm was banished and penalized with $1 billion in penalty, which Qualcomm paid to the state council of the Chinese state and entered back. It is quite interesting to know how this landscape has been evolving over the period of time. Well, I mean, that's not only the thing which stops at the Chinese technical capabilities, but when they mix it with the nationalism or the state interest, it becomes quite a dangerous recipe to test. And I think that is not going to stop. Commodore Wasam was talking about Ran Sang Fei. Ran Sang Fei, I was unfortunate to attend one of the interactions with Ran Sang Fei when he had invited. Uh, there was a coffee with Ran Sang Fei, coffee with Ran 2.0. This was held in January, December, or in February 2020, before I came back. And I wanted to see the person. I was not interested because I knew that how the things and the discussion will be orchestrated all around. But you would listen to the mentality which the big corporations have developed in China, and especially the Huawei, which runs its business on the similar lines, the way packs of Fox run their businesses. You get a chance, you should visit Huawei. Huawei is not very far from Peita Shenzhen campus, about only 4 to 5 miles. It is in the same district, Nanshan district. You would come across what kind of psychology, what kind of tendencies, trajectories, and narratives they have built up. These narratives don't come individually, because we have seen in China, most of these tech firms, when they develop the narratives, most of the narratives have political, ideological connotations. And keeping all these things in a single basket, and when you try to package them, you will understand that the ban on Chinese app was not surprising from the Indian side. Rather, this had to happen. What worries me is that we took a little longer to ban these apps. Let's look at the app called PUBG. I mean, 20 million users in India, and we realized it after that app is in operation for about 18 to 20 months. I think, but we should have done that pretty earlier. Now, these other scale of apps I was mentioning about are still into use. They're still out there, and we don't have a system. The Minister of Information and Broadcasting doesn't have a system where they would vet the app stores, both whether it is Symbian, Android, or the iOS. That there has to be some kind of integrated efforts to do that, or to control it. Now I move to the second part of my presentation. Now, my basic hypothesis here is the ban on Chinese app has created a lot of disbelief among Chinese. The Chinese thought that this would be the last domain Indians would think about or would touch, because India, after Brazil, has been a country which has been levying large amount of anti-dumping duties on Chinese products. I mean, with the doubt that there are a lot of state intervention. Whether that is not doubt, it's a fact, and it's an established fact. And you would see that during question and answers hours, the Indian ministers, the way they have answered. I mean, I was feeling rather than there has to be more action-oriented policy making vis-a-vis China. We have given enough room, enough leverage to China to create interdependencies, and now that dependencies have created a lot of vulnerabilities as far as India is concerned. But I want to talk about two such interdependencies where I would rather put it up this way, that on the one hand, when India is trying to take introspective measures to ban and restrict the proliferation of the Chinese apps and Chinese technologies in India. I think going beyond that, we also need to understand that which are the other places, because as I said, decoupling cannot only happen in terms of services, right? Apps. It would not happen in that domain itself. Decoupling would has to happen even if you just talk about tech trade. It has to happen in terms of computers and peripheries. It has to happen about communication equipments, softwares, and services together, because these four components make the Chinese companies a tech giant. Now, let me take the first case in terms of the trade and investment coupling or decoupling. Okay, my basic hypothesis in these two cases is that the Chinese have developed vulnerabilities in dealing with the Indian market. Okay, now let's assume the Chinese have been planning to invest equivalent to about $7 to $8 trillion equivalent of funds, investments, or capital into BRI scheme of things by 2030, 2035. Well, okay, fine. Now, we look at the size of the economy they are dealing with in case of India, right? The 20 million users, so many apps, the Indians mobile users, the mobile literacy in India, it's growing up quite significantly. Also, the size of Indian middle class, and if you look at about the household investments going up, the Chinese see this is a partial land, and the Chinese will try to develop more dependencies over the Chinese Indian market. And I think that is one where we should be talking, instead of talking about we decouple and we develop our capacities. I would rather say that in the process of we decoupling and developing our capacities, we're going to thread the Chinese interest in India in the larger scale. And let me put it in words. There is little bit of data and maybe repetition to spare me about it. In 2019, the bilateral trade reached about $93 billion, right? Only after Vietnam, Malaysia, and Russian Federation, of which China had a surplus about $57 billion, putting it as rough figures. However, compared to 2018, the bilateral trade between China and India fell by 2.8%. Okay, I'm not talking 19 and 20. I'm talking about 18 and 19. The number of regions, because the Indian trade to China has also gone up. Talking about the first quarter 2020, the scale of the Sino-Indian trade was about $19.43 billion, which was down by 10%. That was when the Chinese were hit by the COVID-19 pandemic, and the capacity of trade was going down, right? And you would say that the tendencies over in terms of investments are concerned vis-a-vis the Chinese, that the investment of Chinese companies in India has been increasing in recent years. So you would see that over the period of time where the trade has been growing. I mean, it is not growing geometrically; it is going very mathematical way. In binary terms or in decimal quantities. But as far as the investments are concerned, that is going up. And I'm not going to quote here the Ministry of Commerce of China. Let me quote the data of the China Global Investment Tracker, okay, which is a project of American Enterprise Institute, EI. And they only track the investments which are above $100 million. And as per their estimate, between 2017, March 2017 up to March 2007 to December 2019, the total amount of investments coming in China, the Chinese investment coming in India, approximately totals to about $15 billion, which includes 43 agreements, 43 investments, 20 mergers, and 23 greenfield investments. Now, these investments are concentrated. Look at the areas we're talking about. Since we talk about larger decoupling, apart from the app ban, we should also see the areas: energy, telecommunication, technology, consumer goods, metal smelting, and real estate. Telecommunication, we have experienced it. Energy is mostly into the thermal energy bits. Chinese are yet to make it to the bits which are opened by the Maharashtra government, but mostly wherever the energy related bits are concerned, investments are concerned, including building the smart grids, the Chinese have been doing a lot. And we forget one thing conveniently over here. We think that only is a tech intensive, but for all of us, we know that even the smart grid projects, maybe there are areas where the technology plays a quite important role. I'm talking about energy transmission. India was very keen, especially I'm talking about Maharatnas. Okay, I'm talking about Indian oil. I'm talking about Coal India. They're very much interested knowing how the China has achieved the efficiency in terms of energy concern, energy transmission, uh, energy that is upstream energy processes. So actually, when we talk about these areas, energy, telecommunication, consumer goods, and metal smelting, it includes some kind of control by the Chinese when they try to do investments. Okay, and if we go by again the CGID statistics in past 3 years, the total scale of investments in these areas, again taking that unit of $100 million exceeding investments, that accounts to 9.5 billion. I'm not talking about those investments which counts to $98 million, $90 million. I'm not talking about it. So that's a different story altogether. I'm not going to discuss now because of the constraints and time paucity, but I'll talk about these things. So interestingly, all these areas, energy, telecommunication, technology, consumer goods, metal smelting, and real estate has achieved growing number of attention from the Chinese. While I say this thing, I don't want to use the term interdependency from the Indian side, but I would say that the Chinese dependency on the Indian market. So that is one thing which the Chinese have developed, a kind of vulnerability as far as it is concerned. Remember, I was talking about I don't trust the Chinese Ministry of Commerce, because if you go by the Chinese Ministry of Commerce data, they talk about the investments coming from the Chinese sides only about 300 million in 2017, and about 310 million in 2019. That looks like they are trying to underestimate the investments being done by the Chinese in India. So I think let's not talk about it, because if I want to give you an example, just for example, Alugu has done work on this thing. Okay, let's talk about Fosun Pharma. The Fosun Pharma's acquisition of 74% equity of brand pharmaceuticals in India is approximately $1 billion. So if we take that as a fact, I don't know Minister of Commerce in China is using which statistics and which metrics to say that, how they are less dependable on China. If you look at the overall conversation in the Chinese realm of intellectuals, strategic thinkers, they make people feel, they make media, telecommunication, they meet telemedias, they make people feel that they are not bothered about these measures taken by the India. But I think, in the longer run, the decoupling is going to have a major problem for the Chinese, because this is not just going to stop at only apps, but this is going to have its own spillover effects. And don't forget, one more thing, I was talking about Tencent and Alibaba. They are, the big groups, and they are relatively active in India and have made equity investments in a lot of internet startups, especially e-commerce industry. And on the side note, I would like to put up on record, if you look at the e-commerce industry, e-commerce is a vertical now. The management school I teach, we have e-commerce, we call e-com. E-com is a vertical. It's a complete solid vertical which has taken over management, which has taken over economics. And surprisingly, in last 10 years, this duopoly of Tencent Group and Alibaba has eaten up all the small players and has been playing quite important role in the domestic as well as external fronts, on the external fronts. and that would exactly going to happen in India. I mean, one can study, the group of investment that the Alibaba and Tencent has made in India. They have made investments in the competitive verticals. There is no horizontal benchmarking anywhere in between. So Tencent has A, B, C, D, E, and the Alibaba has F, G, H, I, whatever they call it. And those who want to align with Alibaba and Tencent are the competitors in India. So in the long run, you would see a different ecosystem emerging in India where we are heading into duopolies, okay, and being funded, uh, supported, manipulated by the Chinese players. Okay, now that's one case over here. Let me go back to these two groups. Okay, Alibaba and Tencent. According to the report, let me quote a report by a company called Iron Pillar. It's a Bombay-based, which released a report in November 2019. And they say that about Alibaba and Tencent have invested a lot of money in e-commerce, customized services, mobile payments in India since 2015. Okay, and as the report summarizes, okay, at the end of 2019, Alibaba and Ant Financial have invested in Indian companies including Paytm Mall, Paytm's online retail stores, food distribution platform Zomato, daily necessities e-commerce platform Big Basket, e-commerce platform Snapdeal, and logistics company Express Bees, and other projects. So you would understand what is the scale of their presence. I'm trying to make this particular interaction between all of us, not just by telling all of you and sharing all of you how Alibaba is great, but trying to give you the characteristics of the investments and what it would result into. It will have a large threats. The investments imply much severe threats for the Indians. But when we talk about decoupling, that's going to give shockwaves to the Chinese players also. So Alibaba is not a small one. Don't forget the Alibaba's sister company, Alimama. You'll be surprised. It's a funny name, but yeah, it does have. And like Alima is called, what we have in a computer periphery, we have motherboard, right, where we plug all the sockets. So Alibaba is trying to play the role of that motherboard in China, where it is hosting the site of Ministry of Science and Technology, Ministry of Foreign Affairs. So Alibaba is playing very very silent role to to dominate not only the technical space, but technical physical space in China. And remember, all these big companies are coming to India. And not forget about investment figures, forget about which enterprises they have invested in. Just understand the linkages between these big enterprises back in China and how it is evolving in India. Now, well, we were talking about Zomato, right, in case of Alibaba. Now, Zomato's competitor is Swiggy, right? And who has invested in Swiggy? Tencent. Okay. We don't need to have this Kon Banega Crorepati over here, but I'm trying to put a straight, simple case over here. Now, we talked about Snapdeal, right? It's an e-commerce platform. Who is competing with Snapdeal e-commerce platform, right? Flipkart. So, these are verticals being by the using the capital investment industries in India. And I think we need to be careful about that in the long run, which is going to be problematic. Now, if you want me to tell you to make it more dramatic, but I think nowadays teaching has, if you add more drama into theory and they are more dramatic, right? So let me tell you in figure. Right now, out of the 30 largest startups in India, okay, half of them, 15. Out of 15, 12 investors are Alibaba or Tencent. Now, you have to keep that thing in mind when you look at the Chinese decoupling. Now, I would like to ask a simple question. When we talk decoupling, any layman will say that the decoupling is going to create more ripple effects in China, right? I'm not talking about Xiaomi and Huawei here, okay? I mean, that's a different segment. We can have a different discussion on that. and how the Xiaomi and Huawei, despite have developed their capacities or large-scale investments in India, are going to suffer because of this decoupling. So I think I have strategically trying to put my presentation in a different form. I'm not saying that let's decouple and build capacity. I'm saying let's decouple and see what shockwaves it would send back to China, and whether it would create or it would try to change their posturing, right? Now, that was one case which I prepared. The second case is about the industrial decoupling. Now, industrial decoupling is the trade which is taking place between India and China, and thankfully we have now policy advocacies like Make in India, Atmanirbhar Abhiyan, and many other things. Interestingly, the Chinese use our own mantra to enter in the Indian space. Okay, you go and listen to the speeches given by recent times by Ran Fei, Liu Zhouhu. You know who is Liu Zhouhu? Liu Zhouhu is the founder of OnePlus Mobile. Okay, he talks about Make in India, and he has talked about Make in India 8 times in 1 week. I think twice on Sundays, basically. And he is more, fascinated about how this Make in India is all about. And as a result of it, you would see that OnePlus has its Hyderabad, where it has based its largest R&D center, responsible for new product development and localization. Okay, so the important directives the Chinese are bringing in India, saying that they want to contribute to the India scheme of things, India's capabilities, try to foster these schemes and policy makings related to Make in India strategy. So these are the methods that the Chinese have been using as far as the industrial coupling is concerned. They want to couple. They don't want to decouple as soon as possible. You would also see that this. You would also notice that OnePlus has formulated local parts manufacturing procurement plans to promote the decentralization of business operation and decisions. So that is not only case about OnePlus. This is same thing, as far as Xiaomi, Vivo, Oppo is concerned. Now, let's put it into perspective. Let's forget about the Chinese company, Xiaomi, Vivo, and Oppo. Okay, let's talk about iPhones. Mobile phone brands which do not have a factory in India are, in general, are levied with high taxes, right? And that's a fact, making it difficult to survive in the market. If you see initially, the Chinese were not sending or exporting the mobile phones. They were selling in parts, and they were later assembled them by outsourced company in India. Well, that's called the anti-cox system the Chinese always operate or adopt to dominate the markets. This is not only in technology, this is in apparels also, this is in other consumables also. That's the best way the Chinese would try to do, and that has been a general tendency of the Chinese companies. So they got to know that since there is a frugal, flexible factor involved into their mobile productions, instead of exporting it to India, the Chinese started paying attention whether or not they would try to manufacture in India. Unfortunately, they found this, the scheme of Make in India to make best use of it. So, in order to produce mobile phones locally, let me take the case of Xiaomi. They have put about 7 manufacturing plants in India, and claims that 95% of the mobile phones sold in India are locally manufactured. Well, that gives you, a perspective, thinking that most of the Chinese companies which are in India are producing using the Indian components and Indian raw materials and selling it in India. As far as Vivo is concerned, which ranks third in sales volume, also set up a plant in India, and in December 2019, the brand further invested about $560 million to expand its local plant. It is expected to produce about 50 mobile phones each year. Now go to Oppo, which is currently set up in Greater Noida, the headquarters. There are about factories that recently announced to double their productions, okay, in next couple of years, and try to be one of the formidable player in Indian market. Also, using the Indian market to export to South Asia, Middle East, Africa, and other markets. Now, this is not the case with the Oppo. Oppo was not the only manufacturer. We thought for the first time that why not use India as a production base, so it can springboard. Okay, use India as a springboard. We have seen Sany again based out of Pune. We have seen the heavy earth movers Liukong in Indore. Okay, they're using India as a base to to spread across South Asia, or to spread across or beyond South Asia to Middle East and those regions. Now, if you look at those factors coming together and playing a role to, or an option or diversification for the Chinese manufacturers concerned, I think the decoupling which India talks about, which has started with apps, and I think which would graduate further into other sectors gradually, will have a negative impact on the Chinese. And this decoupling is going to be a costly affair for the Chinese manufacturers. Now, apart from mobile, because I think I have spoke a lot about apps, mobile telecommunications, I want to give you one more example about automobile industries. Now, we have a number of Chinese companies, investors, venture capitalists who are interested in investing in India. Because India is the fourth largest auto market in the world, with the rising number of rich households, middle class, and it gives one of the lucrative markets for the Chinese, and the Chinese want to benefit from this thing. Understand one thing: the Chinese would not enter into any entry-level market as far as automobile is concerned. But now, since the market is mature, as far as India is concerned, the Chinese are trying to look at it, from more in terms of prospects. You have a Great Wall company, then you have a Haima, you have Fortune, you have General Motors, which are about which is Shanghai-based company. Venture capitalists has invested about 51% of shares in that. You have MG. So these all firms have been using the Chinese origin, Chinese benefits back in China to survive, out-sustain the other competitors, and come to India. Well, these were the two cases which I wanted to focus prominently. Now, let me conclude it by taking one more example. And this is a little bit sensitive, because I think India has been, let me be very critical over here. We have turned our eyes blind towards the Chinese manipulations of multilateral organizations, especially multilateral financial institutions. The Chinese have been convincing India, and India has been thinking that, okay, on a broader scale, why not we work together on the multilateral organizations? Okay, the leaders of leaders of both countries, okay, India and China, have largely agreed that we have to reform the multilateral organizations, whether that is WTO, or whether that is IMF, that is World Bank. And I think, interestingly, that is giving more leverages, more upper hand to the Chinese and not the Indians. Let me tell you one thing: the BRICS ratified a proposal where it requested China to have China's voting rights to be increased. India is also a developing country, but its voting share in World Bank and IMF is lower than Chinese. And somewhere the Indians were, I mean, not Indians, but India thought it is a constructive to contribute, to bring up this, reform process in multilateral organization, and at an equitable scale, equitable pace. But I think mostly in all these cases, just China has benefited a lot. Okay, so I have taken these three cases. One is starting with the trade and investment decoupling. The second thing is about the industrial decoupling, and the third one is about the multilateral institutional decoupling. All these decouplings are going to cost dearly for China, and China would face a lot of problems if this decoupling happens, or we have we have the harvest of decoupling anywhere in our sight in next to 2-3 years, the Chinese would have a real difficult time to meet the challenges, so on and so forth. So let me conclude my short interaction by saying that the bans are definitely are causing problems in China. And this decoupling has been reinforced the way the Chinese, the decoupling process which India has initiated has been attributed or somewhere validated by Chinese the way they scrambled up in last couple of months and started discussing what would be the outcomes and what will be their choices. Third important thing is that Indian manufacturing industry or Indian manufacturing sector should be happy that the decoupling happens, because gone were the days in 60s and 70s when the European and American companies would come to India. There was something like upstream networking would happen, where spillover would happen, and the Indian manufacturer SMEs would learn from the European and American experiences and the companies. But that is not the case with the Chinese. So decoupling is going to be healthy for the Indian industries in the long run, because so far the Chinese no matter how hard you say to Chinese to open up the market, Chinese would not do it. Chinese would always try to displace others, but would not let the market open. So India's policy jeopardizes all the successes of Chinese, and I would like to conclude that would have wider geopolitical consequences for Chinese. And let me quote Alex Capri over here, where he says that this techno-nationalism which is going to manifest, which is manifesting its stronghold in Chinese foreign policy making, is going to have its impact across all aspects of geopolitics, national security, economic competitiveness, or even social values. So I think this is a great beginning as far as India's attempt to educate itself how it should react, or how it should deal with the Chinese what I could say, that the Chinese problem rather. And it's given us an opportunity. Complete decoupling, I would say that is not possible, but yes, we are on a learning curve, and there are a lot of things we can derive from these experiences. Thank you, sir. Thank you very much. I conclude here.
Thank you, Dr. Arvind sir, for your presentation, sharing your thoughts and invaluable insights. We shall now move on to take up the questions with a question and answer session. Sir, I would like to ask you the first question. China has now started to test its official cryptocurrency, the digital currency, as they call, unofficially called the Digital Currency Economic Payment, DCEP. And reports are also emerging that they have already started to test that in 4 cities like Shenzhen and Chengdu. So my question to you is that how will it affect the US dollar dominated the financial ecosystem, as well as how it will affect India?
I think initially, if you see in 2016 and 17, the Chinese regulators had banned the cryptocurrencies. Anywhere, sometimes in 60s, 70s, we were talking in China, even the Chinese citizens were trying to save or open accounts or accrue some of these digital currencies were concerned. Chinese authorities came up very hard, and they said, no, this is not going to happen. I think this was an incubation time to create their own capacities. In 2018 specifically, for the first time, Chinese came up with the testing whether they can have a cryptocurrency or not. This was a complete U-turn looking at the Chinese capacities. 15, 16, 17, they were trying to build capacities by negating, refuting, and rather alleging the West that they're creating a parallel dependencies parallel to the dollar or parallel to other Western currencies. The Europeans or the Westerners are going to create another parallel dependency scheme. Chinese are into experiments stage, and rather I would say that this is too early to say, but I think most of the cryptocurrency experiences are driven by these two groups, because to frankly speaking, See, there are a lot of internal dynamics related to this. When we talk about e-commerce, when we talk about the digital currencies, that literally outplayed the traditional banking, traditional financial systems in China. So they were quite cautious whether or not it should let these new players take the center stage. But eventually, I think there is some kind of a golden point, middle point, which has been achieved by the banking, public institutions, and the new players, saying that, yeah, that's a reality, and why not we have it, but on their own terms. Why do you think BRICS has been agreed to trade in local currencies? Because it serves the Chinese interest. Unless and until the things are not serving Chinese interest, China would not be on the bench.
Thank you, sir. Taking a cue from what you answered, I just have another question as a subsequent to this. As I see,
Yes.
they say the size of the China's digital currency would reach 1 trillion, which is close to around, among in US dollars, it will be close to 140 billion, which is around 1/8 of China's cash economy. So, considering the dicey nature of cryptocurrency in India, because in 2018 the RBI banned the digital currency, no cryptocurrency is banned in India, and then the Supreme Court again it overturned the decision that says no, it's not right. So, with particular reference to India, how do you think it would affect India and the financial ecosystem in India?
So interestingly, Bala, what happens is that these are the safety valves which the Chinese have. Okay, they have not introduced it across the certain cities with any new system or any new experiment the Chinese are doing it. And to say that the major responsibility of running and taking shocks of these failures of successes of cryptocurrencies in China has not, the liability is not with the state, is the liability with the municipal corporations, the liability with the provincial corporations, which has enough cash to make sure that the moment it starts crashing, the moment it gets into garroted it down, they control it. So they have this very less, but they have this, what you would call a sliding slope. The Rupert Murdoch used this term. So they keep this margin to control the sliding, to not to slip away from the sliding slope. And I think that's the fact that never reveal what are the contingencies they're talking about. There are a lot of contingencies they would, and the famous and the most visible contingency they would talk about is, it is not a national scheme. They would always say that this is not a national scheme. It has to be run by the locals. This has to be run by the local. I mean, I will tell you very frankly, most of the cryptocurrency experiences, even Huawei has hired about 3 professors to research and to promulgate the policies as far as the cryptocurrencies are concerned. Those are being hired, paid by the local agencies or local corporations, and they are giving them the salaries. Provincial government would try to keep themselves away from these things unless they really come with up, something credible in nature, which has a real deliverables in physical forms.
Thank you. Thank you for answering, sir. There's a question by Mr. Pradeep Kumar Gautam. He has asked, the New Development Bank and Asia Infrastructure Investment Bank, India is a member of both. How about the status and future? This is the first question. And second question, how many unicorn startups which are worth over 1 billion in India are based on Chinese investments and their future?
Mr. Pradeep, I think as far as the unicorn companies are concerned, as far as 1 million and the Chinese investment in those firms, I don't have the data with me right now available. I use the data given by the CGIT, which only concentrate on focuses on the 100 million plus US dollars. But I would say that there are a lot of firms based out of Hong Kong now. Now, I mean, okay, we have hit now Hong Kong also. Let me tell you, most of these venture capitalists which were registered in China have moved out to Hong Kong, and most of these venture capitalist funds or investments are coming via Hong Kong. And when the Hong Kong calculate, I was referring to the Ministry of Commerce, right, and their investment figures. They were not counting Hong Kong into it. Okay, they were excluding Hong Kong to it. But when they talk about the total GDP, size of the total national GDP, they include Hong Kong into it. But there are a lot of companies based out of Hong Kong and Macau. I know a few of them would invest into the Indian, equal to about I can give you the rough figure, but don't go by. Those are good terms. Would be plus about 200 in between, because there are a lot of firms which are looking for such investments. Now, going back to your first question about AI and NDB, the future, I think there is certainly a good prospect as far as BRICS and AIB is concerned, NDB and AIB is concerned. I think the thing which drives the growth trajectories of NDB is related to its attempt to trade in local currencies. And as far as the AIB is concerned, AIB, where India partners with China, where China holds the largest voting share, but India wants to work with the AIB, not China, with AIB as far as the connectivity projects are concerned. AIB and NDB are the banks which initially supplemented what the Bank, ADB were doing it, okay, initially supplementary. But I think going forward in next 2 to 3 decades, the banks would try to increase its funds, its basis, and try to give, because right now the BRICS Bank is already thinking, it has not implemented it, to whether to lend to non-members or not. AIB is already doing it, right? And if you see the proposals for the AIB's funds are concerned, there are already been propositions with the European members whether they can contribute to the funds held by the AIB member countries, or AIB India as such, the bank as such.
Thank you, sir. There is a question by Mr. Om Rajan. He has asked, Om Ranjan, he has asked, the Chinese tech investors have put an estimated 4 billion into Indian startups. Such is their success that over the 5 years ending March 2020, 18 of India's 30 unicorns are now Chinese funded. So the question he has asked is, the Chinese smartphones like Oppo, Xiaomi led the Indian market with an estimated 72% share, leaving Samsung and Apple. Okay, it's more like a comment rather than a question. There's a question by Nirakshan. He has asked, while other countries such as UK, US, India, etc. have seen a GDP contraction in double digit, China has only seen a contraction of about minus 8% and has successfully recovered itself to stand at 3.2%, the only major power with a positive number. What do you think that the Chinese have done right to revive their economy, or do you think this is just a bluff number from China's National Bureau of Statistics?
I think the Nirikshan, the important factor over here is that the Chinese have never recovered from the slump it has faced from 2004, the last quarter. Okay, the recession or the regression of the Chinese GDP started back from 2007 last quarter. And interestingly, I mean, I'm not going to have any metaphor over here, but in 2007 last quarter, Xi Jinping became the Politburo member. Okay, I mean, I don't want to connect these 2 points. Okay, apart from our amusement. But I would say that from 2007 to so far, the Chinese have been serious in regulatory reforms, and in China, they call it, it's no nonsense software right now. Even if you want to start up any company, any firm, or any new venture, you have to follow all the procedures. You cannot just go with the whims and mercies of your provincial government. So I think that has been done quite rigorously. And I think, and as a part of your answer, everyone would put a blame that China has done an overcapacity. It's a fact. But overcapacity in an economy is a natural phenomenon. Okay, overcapacity is not something a shock, but the scale at which the overcapacity was done now was astounding. And overcapacity is done, but now they are weaker on the supply sides. So over the period of 2007 to 2020, I think the Chinese been putting more efforts in the producers which are doing are not over produced, or they are value added. And secondly, they control the supply chains. In Southeast Asia, no matter what you say about the FTA between China and ASEAN, but the supply chains are still controlled by the Americans. So I think Chinese are still learning the hard lessons. Do business not come to a pawn shop. I think these are that over time.
Thank you.